My name is Kate and I'm a soprano with Stile Antico. I want to tell you a little bit about our new programme, The Queen of Muses, which explores the musical world of Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth's court resounded with all sorts of music, whether it was the sacred music at the Chapel Royal or the more secular love songs that were sung to her in her intimate chambers. People wrote music for all sorts of different reasons to influence the Queen in many different ways. Some composers were seeking royal favour, like William Byrd and Thomas Tallis in their famous Cantiones Sacrae collection. Others were seeking Queen Elizabeth's hand in marriage, like the park books that were sent from King Eric of Sweden to try and woo her. We've been really fortunate to be joined by Dr Katherine Butler, and she's been helping us explore the context of these pieces, how they came to be composed, and particularly how the text came to be put together. So often there's a double meaning in these pieces, and looking at that with her has really brought these pieces to life for us.
The title of your programme, The Queen of Muses, where does this come from? Well, it comes from this poet called Michael Drayton, who is describing a kind of idyllic pastoral scene in which a nymph called Beta, who's clearly Elizabeth, is sitting by the banks of the Thames. How merrily the Muses sing, that all the flowery meadows ring, and Beta sits upon the bank in purple and in pall, and she the Queen of Muses is, and wears the coronal. So this is a celebration, and here what we've got is a kind of real events kind of transmuted into this kind of pastoral paradise where Elizabeth is a Queen of Muses and her courtiers and subjects are all nymphs and shepherds. But what does it mean to call her the Queen of Muses then? Well, partly it's because she's that central figure. She's the prime spectator, if you like, of everything that goes on. But it's also a bit more than that. You didn't normally have a Queen of Muses. You normally had a King of Muses. It was normally the god of Apollo, god of music. So here she is kind of the leader of Muses, maybe. Muses were also the people who gave inspiration. So if you're the Queen of Muses, you might also be the chief inspiration for people, for the tributes of courtiers, poets, and musicians. Or you might see the Queen of Muses as being, you're the best of muses. That's maybe a reference to her own talents and her own musical image that we'll see. So there's quite a lot really bound up in that epithet, Queen of Muses.
In the 16th century, it was a sign of your status and prestige as a monarch to be able to attract the finest foreign musicians to your court. Queen Elizabeth's court was no exception, and one of her foreign musicians was Alfonso Ferrabosco. These musicians from abroad could find themselves in compromising situations. They were often accused of being spies, either for or against the monarch that they served. Most people assume that Ferrabosco was spying for Elizabeth, but in 1577 he got himself into some trouble for attending Mass, Catholic Mass, at the residence of the French ambassador, and was banished for a while from court. And it's perhaps from this time that this motet Exaudi Domine comes, bemoaning to God his ill treatment.
So we're going to move on to thinking a little bit about, why have this musical establishment? Yes, it's great to entertain the Queen, but this is a very large number of musicians. What are they doing? And a lot of it has to do with the international reputation of the court. You've got ambassadors and royal visitors coming in and out. So one of the things she inherits is a very international musical establishment. They'd also be very cosmopolitan in the kind of music that was being sung at the court, so bringing in fashionable music from across Europe. And this is all about impressing the visitors, showing that you are the height of fashion, the height of culture and wealth. And it's also about diplomacy. And the Chapel Royal, of course, becomes key in this period because of the religious difference. Because England has had the Reformation and gone Protestant, there's a lot of curiosity as to what that means. And Elizabeth's Chapel Royal becomes a site for kind of showing what the English church is like, but also presenting it in a very specific light that allays diplomats' fears. So it's quite a lavish place. This lavishness is drawing points of comparison with the Catholic Church. So if you were a Catholic ambassador and came to this, you'd be like, oh, this isn't so different. And that's partly what she's the message that's coming through this. One, it's the wealth and the richness. And the second is, we may be a Protestant church, but we're not so different. You can work with us. This is not hugely different. So with that kind of diplomacy of this in mind, I also want to show you a particular story which always amuses me, and I think shows how aware Elizabeth was of the importance of music in diplomatic relations. This happens in 1564, so we're early in her reign, and it comes in the Spanish ambassador's correspondence, and he's writing home, basically telling his king about the honours he's been shown by Elizabeth. So he says, she ordered her musicians to play the Battle of Pavia, which she assured me was the music she enjoyed most. The Battle of Pavia was a battle in which the Spanish had a decisive victory over the French. And we know from earlier in the letter that the French ambassador was also at court. And he'd not been invited to dinner, quite pointedly, and he'd also was being made to wait for correspondence. So this is not about Elizabeth's favourite piece, this is about playing a piece with particular diplomatic resonances and knowing that the Spanish ambassador was going to know precisely what the Battle of Pavia was and what it had to do with the current situation with the ambassadors at court.
Although we now think of Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen, at the time it was more a question of when or who she would marry than if, and there were many different suitors, given that she was particularly eligible. Also, music was often used as a courtly tool in bids to sort of win the Queen's favour. The Earl of Essex was one of the sort of longest running saga. He was one of the main suitors for Queen Elizabeth's hand, and he often got rather frustrated at the lack of progress with his attempts to capture her hand in marriage. One of these lyrics that he composed, Can She Excuse My Wrongs, was set to music by John Dowland, and in it you can really feel how he expresses his frustration with the lack of progress.
The closer you are to the Queen, the closer you are to power, the more you can get things done. So actually personal relationships are absolutely key to how the English court works and where power lies. So this is Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, and he is one of the most important courtiers in the last part of Elizabeth's reign. He is an important nobleman, and he almost sees it as his right to be a royal favourite, and he is a royal favourite. He does charm the Queen, but he is a troublemaker. He's very ambitious. He's already thinking about, who's the next monarch I'm going to have to chat up. He's much more likely to be seen going off to fight wars, to try and come back glorious. But he's also impetuous, disobedient, and frequently gets himself into trouble. He gets really frustrated that basically he's never trusted with anything. And so he often pushes off from court, has these periods of depression where he goes off in a sulk until the Queen goes, oh no, please come back to court, and then he'll come back. But the first story I want to tell you is from this middle period where he's kind of in and out of favour. Sometimes he's the height of royal favour, and other times it wanes a bit. Henry Wotton is his secretary, and he writes about this incident, which links to quite a lot of music we have from this period. There's a time when Sir Fulk Greville, who was a courtier, had almost superintroduced into favour the Earl of Southampton, which being timely discovered, my Lord of Essex chose to evaporate his thoughts in a sonnet, being his common way, to be sung before the Queen, as it was, by one Hales. So do we have any music that actually might have occurred on one of these occasions? Well, we don't have those lyrics. But there are several other things that have been associated with him. Can She Excuse My Wrong? It's set to a piece called the Earl of Essex Galliard. We know that the name, the Earl of Essex Galliard, definitely postdates the song. So the association with Essex may come later. And we also don't know, because Dowland never tells us who wrote the lyrics to these things. But let's see why it might have been associated with Essex. This is all about a lover who seems to keep, who has clearly committed some wrongs and wants to be forgiven. It's quite angry words. If this is Essex and the Queen, these would be quite dangerous lyrics potentially to be singing to the Queen, right? Again though, we've got this set to a galliard, a quite cheerful galliard. And I think this is part of how Essex might, if this is by him, have got away with it. If you set cross angry lyrics to something cheerful and slightly bouncy and a standard dance form, then in some way you've kind of muted or contained your threat. I mean, this is what Dowland could have done. So that's not what we get, essentially. That's what we could have had. This is the second part. And if you look at the top singing line, you'll see it suddenly is not particularly interesting. And that's because where that star is up there is where the melody is really heading. And that melody is the melody of a popular song. What on earth have we got a popular tune coming up in the middle? And this is the middle of Can She Excuse? Well, this piece is called Shall I Go Walk in the Woods So Wild? The greenwood in this time, the woods, is an uncivilized, barbarous place. It's like the wilderness. And so going to the greenwood is about kind of being banished from court. So you can see how this fits with Essex, who's always going on about, banishing himself from court because he's out out of the Queen's favour. If this was a lyric from Essex, then this really fits those lyrics, because he's going, well, can she excuse my wrongs, or am I going to push off, basically?
We've really enjoyed exploring this fascinating and varied selection of music, and we're looking forward to sharing it with audiences.